Last week we saw the GDP numbers showed the national economy contracted in the June quarter by 7%. The mining industry not immune to it. However, it is talking now about 32 mines, 15,000 jobs in New South Wales alone and $13 billion in investment. I caught up with the Minerals Council CEO in New South Wales, Stephen Galilee, and started by asking him how the pandemic has affected that industry.
Well, here in New South Wales, we moved very quickly to implement national health and safety protocols. In fact, they were implemented right across the resources sector across the country very early on. That helped us keep our operations going generally across New South Wales and across the country. The health and safety of our workforce has been our number one priority, but as the COVID pandemic has continued, the impact on jobs has so far been relatively small. There has been an impact nonetheless, and like other sectors, we're not immune. We continue to work very hard to minimise those job impacts because we know what impact they have on mining families and mining communities while operating our mines safely.
And in terms of working around the problems posed by the pandemic, can you give us some practical examples of what your members have had to do?
Well, obviously, we've had the PPE and the social distancing at our operations. Any large gathering of people in the one place has involved social distancing on transport of workers to site, including on buses. It's involved social distancing when we transport workers from the surface, for example, in our underground mines, literally to the coal face, as well as a range of other measures. In New South Wales, we don't have the fly-in, fly-out workforce that other states do. But those border restrictions do continue to have an impact at operations near our borders, but also where people who are fulfilling important safety and statutory roles need to travel across those borders and home again to do so.
Stephen, I noticed that BHP is committing to reducing its emissions at its Queensland mines by 50% over the next 5 years. Is that a trend you're seeing across the industry at the moment?
We obviously have a very important role to play in tackling emissions, and our sector is increasingly doing that. In particular, our metals mining sector, which now represents about 1/3 of our New South Wales resources sector, is very, very heavily involved in the supply of many of the metals, minerals and rare earths that are essential for the manufacture of renewable energy components like solar panels and wind farms. So our industry is right in the middle of that, and we're seeing an increasing trend across the companies in doing so.
And so, Stephen, what do you see as the future of coal from your perspective? You've got BHP, for example, saying that their reports they've hired UBS to demerge from its coal mines. Does that say about the sector that if the biggest miner is moving out of it, that there's a question mark over its future?
COVID has had an impact on the sector, but the long-term fundamentals are positive. We're seeing the New South Wales government release a coal strategy a few months ago with expectations of that strong demand continuing for the next 2 or 3 decades at least. The issue for us is how long the pandemic is going to suppress global economic growth as it has been doing for the past several months, because as thermal coal in particular is an input for growing economies. If economies aren't growing, it does have that impact on demand. But regardless of what BHP do in relation to their one single thermal coal mine asset in New South Wales, I expect there'll be strong interest from other industry players and elsewhere in taking that asset on, because the fundamentals there are very, very strong.
And finally, I know there is a fair bit of investment going into carbon capture and storage. Is it proving more effective, cost-effective as well?
Well, it's a shame that we haven't seen the level of investment in carbon capture and storage over the last decade or so that we've seen in other technologies that are able to reduce emissions, because we probably would have been a bit further down the technology path there than we are. But nevertheless, the technology is proving that it is highly possible, and in fact it is necessary that we promote carbon capture and storage, including here in New South Wales, if we're going to hit our emissions reductions targets here in New South Wales, nationally and globally. And in New South Wales, the New South Wales government has recognised that. They're looking to put money into carbon capture and storage research. There are several prospective sites in New South Wales where it may be possible and we're hopeful that we're going to see more progress on that because it's a very important technology for the future of our industry too.
Stephen Galilee from the New South Wales Minerals Council, thanks very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.